They thought I would sign the papers and disappear, but when I smiled, their confidence collapsed like a house of cards. This is the story of how my husband and his mother tried to ruin my life over dinner, and how I turned their plot into their own nightmare. You have no idea what I have, I replied with a smile. Our family dinner in Austin, Texas was interrupted by a stranger in a formal suit. Mrs. Walker? The lawyer handed me an envelope. Inside were divorce papers that I hadn't filed. My husband, Mark, was lazily sipping California Cabernet. We've already discussed it. You'll sign, he said. His mother, Linda, whispered, Don't complicate things, Jessica. Trembling, I flipped to the last page and laughed. They had no idea what I had up my sleeve. Hello. My name is Jessica. I'm 42 years old. I've been married to Mark, who's 44, for 17 years. We have 2 children, a boy and a girl, both in high school. I work part-time as an accountant at a small local company in Austin, Texas. Mark is a corporate lawyer, not very charismatic, but excellent at manipulating people, knows all the loopholes, and hates losing. At least, he's convinced of that. Let me take you back to that evening. It was a Wednesday. I remember because we always make roast chicken on Wednesdays, and my daughter Sarah complained that I forgot the garlic bread again. I was finishing the mashed potatoes in the kitchen. The kids were upstairs, likely arguing over who would set the table. Mark had come home unusually early that day and opened a bottle of expensive Merlot, brought by his mom, Linda, from a trip to California. Yes, she had been staying with us for over a week, helping around the house. But in reality, meddling, judging, and adding her passive-aggressive remarks to every aspect of life. The doorbell rang. I wiped my hands and opened the door. Standing there was a neatly dressed man in his mid-40s with a briefcase. Good evening, he said. I'm looking for Jessica Walker. That's me, I replied. He nodded and immediately opened the briefcase. I'm Thomas Evans from Evans & Partners. I have documents requiring your immediate attention. My heart sank. Did something happen? He silently handed me a bulky envelope. I let him in. Mark appeared behind me with a glass of wine in hand, completely at ease, almost too much so. What's going on? I asked them both. Mark gestured towards the dining table. Let's take a seat, since this is official business. Evans followed us, placing the envelope on the table as if it were just another routine transaction. I opened it with trembling hands. The first words I saw were divorce petition in bold. I froze. I didn't file for divorce, I said, staring at the papers in shock. Mark sat back comfortably, crossed his legs, took a long sip of wine, as if my reaction were inconveniencing him. We're aware. We've already decided you'll sign. My throat was dry. It was hard to speak. Across the table, Linda leaned in and softly said, Just agree, dear. It'll be easier for everyone. The room was so quiet, I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock. I looked at the papers. My name was all over them, numbers, financial details, proposals for division of property and custody. This wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum. Gathering my courage, I asked, Why? Mark shrugged. It's not working anymore. You're always distracted. The kids have grown up. We decided it's time. We, as if I had been part of some secret meeting. I asked louder, Why now? He didn't flinch. There's someone else. Calmly, like he was reading a report, and Linda just folded her hands and gave me a look saying this was for the best. That's when I noticed the date on the documents, 2 weeks ago. They had planned everything in advance. I asked the next question, fearing the answer. Is she pregnant? He hesitated, then took another sip of wine and muttered, Yes. It felt like a punch. Linda patted my hand. It's all right, Jessica. You've lived your best years. Now let go. Let go. Let go of the home I built, the children I raised while Mark worked 70-hour weeks, holidays, weekdays, moments of joy and order, and now, even my marriage, as if it were a scarf to be shrugged off. I silently flipped through the papers and found the custody section. He wanted full custody, claiming I was emotionally unstable. I had a panic attack in the grocery store last month, told him, thought he'd care. But he used it against me. I read familiar phrases painting me as an absentee mother, not working 20 hours a week, but living in 2 different worlds. My hand shook, no longer from fear, but from anger. On the last page, a place for a signature with today's date already filled in. They really expected me to sign. I looked up and simply smiled. This was the beginning of change. Here I am, at the dinner table, cooling chicken, kids upstairs, husband and mother-in-law, both waiting for me to give in. I didn't shout, didn't cry, just smiled, because I knew. I didn't sign. I laid the papers back on the table, looked at Attorney Evans, and quietly asked, Have you ever handed papers to someone who knows how to change the game? He furrowed his brow. Ma'am, I'm just... Sit comfortably, I said, still smiling. You're going to witness something special today. I stood up, left the room, and headed to a small safe in the closet of our bedroom. Mark hadn't touched it for years. Inside was a black folder labeled J. Allow me to explain. 6 years ago, Mark made a mistake. He didn't log out of his laptop while I booked a rental car for a trip that never happened. I wasn't snooping, I swear. The spreadsheet with offshore accounts was open. When I asked, he said it was work-related. I took screenshots, wrote down account numbers, not because I intended to use them, but to protect myself. Something inside said, I wasn't as safe as I thought. Back at the dinner table, I dropped the folder in front of Mark. His smirk vanished. Linda squinted. What's this? Something I almost forgot I had, I replied. And funny, I just remembered. Mark didn't touch the folder. Jessica, don't make a scene. I'm not. It's just copies of wire transfers, offshore accounts, shell companies, mostly in the Bahamas. Nothing huge, just a couple million you never declared to the IRS. Evans, the lawyer, sat up straight in his chair. I asked him, Still think I should sign something tonight? He packed his things quietly, muttered, Perhaps we should reschedule, and left. Now it was just the 3 of us. Linda eyed Mark. You said it was clean. It wouldn't be messy. Mark stood, pale. She's bluffing. I'm not bluffing. In fact, I have even more. I've been seeing a therapist not because I'm unstable, as the petition claims, but because I'm worn out from being a wife and mother. She kept meticulous notes I prepared to defend myself if needed. 2 days passed. Mark barely spoke except when necessary. Linda fluttered around the house, trying to be helpful, but her smiles were strained with nervousness. Then on Friday, I received a letter from my son's school, not an email, a physical letter. Someone, guess who, had already initiated the transfer of both kids to a private school across the state, not informing me. It was already in progress. They intended to take the kids, to start a new family without me. But it didn't happen. I went to the school that same day, brought documents, reports, copies of the divorce petition, custody papers, a letter from the family therapist. The principal, dumbfounded, promised to intervene. No transfer could proceed without the consent of both parents. The process was halted immediately. That evening, I confronted Mark openly, in front of the kids. Yes, I wanted them to see the truth. "You tried to move them behind my back," I said. He stiffened. "I thought it was best." "You can't decide that alone." The children were not surprised. They had seen their dad's waning interest in school, family affairs. My daughter stood beside me. She didn't say a word, just stood with me. It hurt him more than anything I could have said. But here's the twist. His new pregnant woman wasn't his girlfriend. She was a client, married. I found out directly. She called me. Ashley, 37, works in IT. She said, "I just discovered he's still married to you. I thought he divorced years ago." He lied to her too. She thought they had a legitimate relationship, and now, pregnant and furious, we met, had coffee, swapped stories, compared lies. He manipulated more than one woman, and carelessness was his norm with arrogance. And yes, I gathered evidence. Now his perfect plan began to crumble. In 3 weeks, I collected everything: emails, transactions, messages he thought he'd erased. Witnesses. Yes, witnesses. People remember when they've been mistreated. Mark underestimated many, but his biggest mistake was underestimating me. After the failed transfer attempt, after Ashley, his pregnant client, threatened legal action and exposed him to her husband, things rapidly descended. He tried damage control, sweetened, left flowers on the table, bought groceries, even cooked once, as if we could forget everything. He tried erasing me. I let him play his role while I communicated with real attorneys, not those who show up at dinner like stalkers. My lawyer was clear, calm, the kind who doesn't raise her voice but points out the truth and watches the reaction. She told me everything. The offshore accounts could sink him. The attempts to alienate the kids would backfire in court. Attempts to hide assets during divorce are not only suspect, but illegal. We filed a countersuit. Not quietly. We served papers in his office, in front of his employees. A friend who worked in the building said he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Then I went further. I filed a complaint with the Texas State Bar with evidence about his services and client relations, undeclared finances. They began an investigation. Then I filed a report with the police, not out of revenge, but because the accounts had signs of tax fraud and I didn't want to go down with him. I protected myself and the kids. They chose me. My son said, "I don't want to live with someone who treats people as options." It hit hard because I let Mark see me as an option for years. Yes, I made mistakes too. I stayed silent too long. I ignored signs. I believed when he said, "You're lucky I care for you." I laughed in moments that should have been red flags, and maybe I should have left years ago. But I didn't because I believed in fixing, in keeping a family, in being a good wife. Now I believe in respect and finally started giving it to myself. It took months, but the court sided with me. Full custody. He has visitation rights. The house is mine. The assets he tried to hide revealed, frozen. The firm he worked for dropped him, asked him to leave as soon as the ethics committee came calling. Ashley had a baby girl, named her something soft and beautiful, allows him visits under supervision. She is strong, in her own way. We aren't exactly friends, but there's respect between us. Linda went back to Florida, sent me a letter saying she was disappointed in how I handled things. I didn't respond. You know who isn't disappointed? The version of me who finally showed herself. The one who read those papers at the dinner table and decided, you won't break me. I still cook dinner on Wednesdays, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, garlic bread. Never forget the bread now. The table is smaller, but the silence is peaceful. My daughter helps set the table. My son plays music while I cook. And I sit, eat my meal, and smile. Not because everything is perfect, but because I walked through fire and came out whole. He thought he was bringing an end to my story, but in reality, he just set up the beginning of my best chapter. Did you like the story? Write your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next interesting story. See you tomorrow.